Liam, here's a question for our engineering expert from Sarah. Sarah would like to know how long are we expecting the power to be out in the South Island after an Alpine Fault earthquake? And she's interested in restarts and black starts, and also how long should we prepare to be without power? She said that she lives just north of Christchurch.
Great, thanks for that question. So I guess along with a lot of other questions that have been answered, again, I'll use the word it depends, a couple of words, it depends. So it definitely depends on where you are on the South Island, and as you'd expect, based on the intensity of shaking, that's going to likely result in a variability in the impacts it's going to have for your electricity network. So there may be very little disruption in some areas. There may be a couple of days, and that likely to ramp up to maybe over a month in some of the areas like the West Coast has been mentioned before, that there may be a month or more of disruption to some areas because of the damage to that electricity network. I guess in the location you are, just north of Christchurch, that maybe that's in the lower end of the scale in terms of that level of disruption. And I guess that's just related to the one thing there that's related to is the intensity of the shaking is less in that location as it are in some of the other parts across the South Island. It's not just sort of the shaking in one level because it's a network, it's how that then propagates out throughout the networks and what that means to that outage. So I guess there's a lot of work with understanding what the damage might be to different components of those networks. And you actually see sort of power poles, often they perform pretty well at high levels of shaking, but if you link in things like landslides and liquefaction, that really has an impact on how that's going to perform if they're going to stay standing up and continue to allow that power to transmit through. And then also, I guess, another key aspect of that is how do you access those for repair? So there's a lot of reliance of the electricity network on the road network to try to access and allow that to build forward. And there's work and an understanding of those lifeline networks that they need to work together to understand how to progressively bring things back online. And again, that's very much a factor of where is the damage, where are the people, how much people there are to try to allow that to occur. I'll sort of focus in on the question around the hydro plants because that's an interesting one. So yeah, again, it very much depends what's the level of shaking at those different locations, and that spans from, is it the level of shaking that they need to shut things down to just check for any damage? Is it severe enough that there is going to be damage developed? You know, that's a process that will go through, and that will depend on the type of Alpine fault event that occurs and where that energy is really pushing out from that fault to the different areas is going to depend on what that sort of damage will be. But if they do shut down, I guess the key thing there is that doesn't immediately mean that the entire network's out of power. So really the electricity network is all about balance. So if you reduce down the generation in one location, then you need to balance that loss of generation with the demand to keep that in line. So they may shut down plants together or progressively shut ones down and bring them back up to try to ensure that across that balance, there's power supplied as best as possible as they can following that event. So, and that there's a lot of work that's been done to try to understand what that might be. There was the question about black start. The black start would only need to occur if there's a total loss of the network across the island, and that's sort of quite a very unlikely thing to occur. So because they're allowed to have that balance, they'll be doing whatever they can to keep that network going, and it's only really if you lose everything that they will have a slow re-energization, but it's very, very unlikely that that would occur.
Well, it sounds like you might be without power for a wee while. So Tom, you were talking earlier about having secured your bookcases. Have you done anything at home to kind of prepare for not having power?
I have actually. So we've got a big gas supply for our barbecue and a whole bunch of charcoal because my wife loves a good charcoal barbecue. So the idea is that we can have an alternate heat source so that if an event happens in winter when it's cold, that we can still be warm. And I've just got a little baby, so we need to make sure that she's okay. And I guess it's the same for many places across New Zealand. I grew up on a farm in the central part of Canterbury, so we'd often lose power from snowfall or whatever. So it's about having that redundancy available and in place.